Now, one of the things that with that understanding that what makes us a human being, from that Genesis 2:7 perspective, is the body of flesh and the Spirit of God, the breath of God, is that I think that there are two different ways of looking at that, and I've had a way of looking at it traditionally, or at least lately, and I still lean into that, but I'm open to possibilities, right? So I wouldn't say that I know this to be true for sure. But what I mean is this. So in Genesis 2:7 it says that, and this is obviously just my paraphrase of it because I'm driving, I don't have it pulled up in front of me, but it's that, the man was formed from the dust of the ground, and then God breathed His Spirit into man, and that made man a living being. So from that perspective, what makes man is twofold, right? It's that spirit and that body. It's that union of spirit and body specifically that makes us a human being, that hypostatic union, that unbreakable union. So traditionally, I've held that view, right, that God was the source of our consciousness, and that our body was our body, and that's the union of those two things together that make us a human being. And so that when we die, right, the body dies. The Spirit of God is immortal, right? Of course, it lives on. So in my view, traditionally, or at least again lately, it's been that when a human being dies, we cease to exist. That's annihilation, right? Our being, our isness, ceases to be, because that's the sever of that union, that hypostatic union. So from that perspective, some sort of afterlife where our individualness continues on doesn't make any sense, right? Because that body and that soul, that spirit, I should say, not soul, and that's the second part of this conversation, but the spirit and that body have been severed, and they've been separated, and so the only thing that's left is that divine spark, that God, that consciousness, that ground of being, right? So that's how I've been looking at it. Now, yeah, in this view that I had been more recently looking at what it is that makes us us, right? So from that Genesis 2:7 perspective, the Spirit of God, body of dust, it's that union between the two that make us us. Now I would, in the way that I've been viewing this, sort of look at who I think I am, my individualness, as really the language that I use is a character, right? So what makes me me? If the Spirit of God is consciousness, is my consciousness, who am I? What makes me me, right? And so it seems to make sense to me that who we are is the language I use is character, right? Like, it's a character. It's who am I individually as a character is based upon my lived experiences, right? So I was born in December of 1986. I am a few months away from completing 39 years of life. I had the two parents that I had. I grew up where I grew up, and all of these life experiences shaped me into the person that I am today, right? And I think a thought experiment that I like to use on this is, imagine if instead of being born in rural Kentucky to the parents I was born in, what if I'd have been born on the streets of some major city like New York City or Los Angeles?
There's a lane closure ahead.
Both of my parents were, homeless and drug addicted. Would I be the same human? Would I be the same person, the same character then as I am now? And I think any of us, being honest, would say, of course not. Like, of course, our lived experiences shape the person that we become. So then the question I have to ask myself is, am I a unique individual like that? That is there really a true me, a true self? Or is there only just a false self, right? Am I just a character that I think I am? And that all adds up if you think that the consciousness that we are is God, is divine. That's the shared consciousness, right? Which, to me, that's more in line with what I would consider traditional non-dualism, that we are all one consciousness, shared, experiencing individual experiences because of that union. It's not just the spirit. We're not just a spirit, but we really do have a body. We really are living these individual experiences. Now, I guess there is a second way to interpret those, that Genesis 2:7 sort of makeup of what makes a human being, right? Because the way it's written in that verse, it says that God breathed his spirit into the man that had been formed from the dust of the ground, and what it created was a living soul, right? So there is a way of conceptualizing it to where I think a good way of putting it would be that the spirit and the body come together and create an offspring, and that offspring is the soul, and that soul is who I am. So that in that regard, there is a true me. There is a true self beyond just saying that God is my consciousness. In that view, God wouldn't necessarily be our consciousness. God would be the spark that gives us life, but our consciousness would actually be our individual soul that was created based upon our body. Right? So I'm open to that possibility, but I just don't think it makes as much sense. Not with the lived experiences that we have. I think the first way that I explained it makes far more sense, just because if we look at who we are is largely based upon our lived experiences. But perhaps there's more to it. Can we say that we are nothing more than our lived experiences? Is there really a me, a true self, a true Nathan that exists? And I think that's the question. I don't have an answer for it. I tend to think that if we were to peel away the character that we are, peel away the layers of who we think we are, and we were to do that enough, what we would eventually find is that there's nothing but the pure divine, right? There's nothing but God. That's behind all of our consciousness. And so, I don't know. I think that there are multiple ways of viewing it, and I'm open to to learning more for sure. But I think that the question for me becomes, let's presume that soul that is created from that union of the Spirit of God and the body of dust is real, and it creates a real soul that is me. That is my consciousness, not the Spirit of God that's breathed into my body, but my consciousness actually is the soul created from that union. Then the question for me becomes, is that soul eternal? Will it live forever? Or does the soul die when the spirit and the body are separated? So when I die, does that soul also die, or does it continue on beyond, right? So the body, of course, goes, as the verse says, to dust it will return. And then God's spirit breathed into us is God's spirit, so it's eternal. So the question is, does that soul continue, or once that union is broken, does the soul also cease to be? And so, I don't know. Is the soul a real thing? And I know thing's not the right word to use, but I'm kind of a moron. I don't really have any better words for it than that. So, there's a lot of questions involved in that. I certainly don't have any answers, very few answers, but a lot of questions. And I really do think, for me, the more fundamental question is, what is my consciousness? Is my consciousness this Spirit of God, this breath of God that's breathed into man? Is that consciousness? Is that what our consciousness is? Or is my consciousness my soul, which would be the offspring of Mother Earth and Father God, right? This offspring of my body of dust and the breath of God. So what is my consciousness? Is my consciousness the Spirit of God breathed into man, or which would make my consciousness God? Or is my consciousness my soul, which is the offspring of that breath with my body? That, to me, I guess that's where the main bulk of my questions lie. If I had a answer for that, I could probably move beyond that. But that seems to be, at least where my mind is at today, that seems to be where the bulk of my question lies.